Hello and welcome to NewsClick. We have with us today Professor Biswajit Dhar, who is an expert on trade and the economy, the global one, not just the Indian one. And we'll be discussing what is perhaps in everybody's mind. What is Trump's trade war all about, and what are the likely fallouts for not only the world, but particularly for India? Biswajit, good to have you with us again.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabir.
You have been coming to us for a long time.
That's right.
And we go back an even longer way.
Absolutely.
Coming quickly to the crunch of the issue, do you see this trade war ending quickly, or do you think it will continue for a much longer period and might even reconfigure not only the trading world but the economic world?
No, my view is that this trade war is here to stay. And this is simply because of the fact that Trump has oversold this idea of Make America Great Again. And this entire America First trade policy revolves around this idea of Make America Great Again. And it will be very difficult. So he's riding a tiger. And it's very difficult for him to get off this sort of a raging tiger anytime soon. Now, he realizes now that, there are problems. So this 90-day pause hasn't come out of love for anyone. He recognizes that there are going to be inflationary pressures on the economy. And everyone worth its salt in US and elsewhere has predicted that before the end of the year, the US is going to slip into a recession. So, quite contrary, in fact, diametrically opposite situation is emerging in the US as compared to what Trump had sold during his campaign trail. So Trump is now caught. He can't very little room for maneuver.
He can't dismount the tiger.
He can't
trading tiger that he has unleashed.
Absolutely, he can't do that. But at the same time, he can't backtrack because that will be a big issue for his base. So he can't be seen. He can't show to his base that he's weak, that he's actually backtracking. So he'll keep on sort of hammering. How far he hammers, that's the real issue. Whether he reduces the tariffs, tries to be a little more reasonable. But this whole strategy of using tariffs to solve the larger problem that the US faces today, and which is really, the mounting trade deficit. And therefore, his completely illogical demand that he would like to have zero sort of a trade balance with all the countries. He doesn't want to see any trade surplus. Yeah.
Two quick follow-ups on this, starting with the dollar seems to be falling.
Yeah.
That if his understanding of the economy and his financial economic advisors, two of them, Navarro and Miran, if their predictions were right, dollar should have been going up.
Yes.
The dollar is falling.
Yeah.
And in fact, the main reason why he seems to have backtracked was the bond market, that the US treasuries were not selling. And therefore the interest rate, which means that it is not selling, it's becoming cheaper, is going up.
That's right.
We won't get into why that happens and so on.
Yeah.
Too difficult for most of us to follow.
Absolutely.
Your area of expertise. But going to the larger issue that you're raising, that this, in this way that you are placing, it appears that Trump is trying a particular solution to a real problem that exists in the US economy.
That's right.
Which is the fact that dollar is overvalued.
Exactly.
So in that sense, because it's a global currency, there is this overvaluation of the dollar, and therefore manufacturing in the US is difficult.
That's right.
But if we look at the flip side of it, this has allowed the US to buy large pieces of the world
Exactly.
in different ways.
Exactly.
Because the dollar is overvalued against other currencies.
That's right.
So they can actually use dollars to buy up property outside, which for finance capital in the US is a good thing.
Exactly.
So this is really the fact that the US is now dominated by finance capital, and that's against the interest of the working class as well. Now, Trump is pro-finance capitalists, if you will.
Right.
Because after all, we have a number of them sitting in his cabinet.
Absolutely.
With Mr. Musk being the key one. You can say he has engineering, innovation, genius, etc., etc. At the end of it, it is also
Absolutely.
finance capital. If you talk about intellectual property,
Exactly.
which Musk thinks is him. So leaving that out, Tesla's shares are
Absolutely.
much more overvalued than what it would be
Absolutely.
if there was no Musk
Absolutely.
and if he did not have the hype. But leaving all of that out, so how does a financial power who's no longer a manufacturing power get out of this?
No, that's the biggest problem that the US actually faces today, because like you mentioned that if you have an extremely overvalued currency, and if you look at Miran's paper, November paper, he starts with this problem that the US faces. So he is not
It's the Hudson Institute paper.
Yeah, exactly. Hudson Bay Institute paper. And he says that, the problem is an overvalued currency. Yeah. So having admitted that the problem is an overvalued currency, he actually goes and backs the use of tariffs. So there could have been two ways in which the US could have handled this. One is addressing this overvalued currency, where everything that is produced in the US, whatever little is produced, is not competitive. Yeah. So there was a need for the US to look at the overvalued currency and do some sort of adjustments to it. Now, of course, you given the fact that it's an international reserve currency, and there are a lot of stakes, countries have their stakes in the dollar, and especially large economies like Japan and Korea and China have their treasury bonds and so huge investments. So, if there is a drop in dollar value, they actually suffer capital loss. So, depreciating dollar, the value of the dollar, is really not in the US's hands. Everyone has a stake in it. And one would have thought, and this is again something that Miran talks about, that they should have actually gone in for a Plaza Accord kind of an arrangement. Get your major partners together, find a way of slowly reducing depreciating the dollar over a 2, 3, 4 year period,
Or even
longer, so that this kind of a continued pressure, because for at least for the past 10 years, the dollar has consistently got overvalued. So you at least put not just a check to this trend, but also try and reverse this. Again, the problem is that, look, since the dollar is the lubricant for trade, yeah. Now, if the US stops, having these kinds of huge trade deficits, then the supply of dollars in the national economy will also get sucked out. So that's another problem. So, like Robert Triffin had talked about in the late 50s, early 60s. So that would be another problem. So that's why it was important for Trump not to act alone in this kind of a manner, the manner in which he's going like a bulldog. He should have actually found the flock.
like a bull, actually.
Well, he's also biting, so that's why I'm saying. And he should have actually got the flock together. had a meeting and in his backyard, which Miran also talks about, that we could have an accord in Florida, and that should have been the way forward. Rather than doing that, what Trump always likes to do is go with a huge hammer, and is trying to reduce countries or compel countries to sell less to the US, and on the other hand force countries to buy more from the US. He's doing both the things at the same time. The reciprocal tariffs actually work both ways. A lot of people don't understand this. It's just not about US imposing tariffs, but also US forcing countries to reduce their tariffs, which is our problem, one of the major problems that we have. And then that's why we got stuck. And I don't think that there is an easy exit for Trump, having committed so heavily or invested so heavily into this whole reciprocal tariff exercise. It's difficult for him to, like I said, to get off.
If what you're saying suddenly triggers a thought in my mind, this is really Nixon's going off the gold standard that introduces this long-term problem for the dollar.
Absolutely.
And in fact, that is why dollar was always pegged to the gold. Till in 1971, I think, Nixon goes off the gold standard.
That's right.
So that, according to you, is where the divergence takes place from the real value of the dollar to the trade value of the dollar in terms of what you get for it in the international exchange.
The slight difference is that, Nixon really threw up his hands and said that, look, I can't actually have this gold, the gold dollar standard anymore. I can't compensate countries for having held that much of dollars, and that $35 an ounce, I can't actually give you my gold. So he threw up his hands and said, look, enough is enough. Do whatever you like. And then the dollar went into, sort of a free run. Now, what Trump is doing, he's still trying to hold on to the dollar. And he's still trying to keep the dollar overvalued. He doesn't want to talk about, depreciation, dollar depreciation. And the other thing is, given his nature, he doesn't think that others can come to the US's rescue. He thinks that all the solutions lie with him. He's the guy who decides everything. He's the one who has all the solutions, and he's going to be providing all the solutions. So that's the big problem. So if a person sort of deludes himself to such an extent, how can you actually convince him that, no, that's not the way, there's another way?
Well, the engineers have a saying for it. If you have a hammer, you think everything is a nail.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Coming back to the other issues, which is that he has made it more or less impossible for him to backtrack. We're not even getting into the fact that he has a formula, which is basically how much tribute one must pay to him.
That's right.
It's not a serious economic or financial formula. People have talked about it, so we'll talk about it here. But if you look at it from what point of view we are saying, it's a formula which means how much tribute each country has to pay.
That's right.
And that's why also the belief that tariff is what the importing country doesn't pay, but the country exporting to US has to pay.
That's right.
Now, that itself is again an issue. But if you say that if you have to balance the books in this way, then what you have to finally do is to sell more to the US. And even if the goods are overvalued, you still have to buy it.
That's right.
That even if Lesotho doesn't want iPhones for selling its diamonds to the US, it still is required to sell, buy goods, American goods, which, as you have said at the present moment, are a very narrow segment of the economy. And even there, the 80% of it is manufactured outside.
That's right.
Like
Absolutely.
the iPhone. In fact, where the US holds is the intellectual property rights to design, software, and so on. So you don't see a rebalancing of the Trump's trade policies. You are expecting, by what you're saying, a crisis in the global economy, which will intensify, and at which point finally the market might drive into Mr. Trump a certain good sense. But there's one problem here. Trump cannot stand for election again. So second term, Trump really doesn't have to cater to what the people are saying. He can say, okay, I have a long-term vision. I can do this for 5 years. Do you think that's also possible or viable for the American economy to do this? Not Trump, but the American economy to continue on this path.
No, certainly not. But see, let us also not forget that Trump is talking about a third term. So he hasn't actually foreclosed that option. How he's going to do that, no one knows. He doesn't have the that kind of a
Constitution does not allow
and doesn't have that kind of a majority in the Congress to tamper with the Constitution to such an extent that he gets a third term. But that's in his mind. So I think his advisors have told him that he can't get this done the way he's talking about, and he would have to wait. But of course, Trump doesn't have the time to wait. He wants to get results quite quickly, and as at the end of the day, what he is doing is that he is going to be wrecking all the global governance institutions, the post-war global governance institutions, quite comprehensively. Now, WTO is already broken. He completely broke the WTO. And this whole reciprocal tariff thing is possibly the last nail in the coffin. So every country...
but to be fair to Trump broke it partially in the first Trump administration. Biden widened it, saying military exceptions, what used to be called in our terms the nuclear exceptions in WTO, that if you exercised it, then of course the trade stands broken, trade framework stands broken. And expanding it more and more was what Biden also did. So in that sense, this trek back from WTO started as in some sense a bipartisan support in the United States. But what you're saying is right, that this is the official, shall we say, requiem for
That's
WTO.
right, absolutely.
Because if you see, once the adjudicatory body was not functioning, therefore their dispute settlement wasn't there. And any country could do what it wants.
Exactly.
And that's of course Trump or US leading it.
Absolutely. No, that's why I'm saying that, see, the WTO had two arms. One was the negotiating arm and the other was the adjudicating arm. Now, the adjudicating arm was already broken. And like you said, that Biden only deepened the crisis. He never wanted to sort of remedy that problem. And now what is happening is the negotiating arm is being broken. So now, instead of countries negotiating multilaterally, and looking at the balance of gains and losses in a multilateral framework, now they are doing it vis-a-vis the US.
Only the US.
Only the US. And of course, it's going to be losses, not gains, because Trump has already indicated his bottom line. He said, my trade policy is meant for the benefit of my constituencies, my ranchers, my farmers, that all the businesses and everything. Now, this is a fantastic kind of a situation today, because all the trade and then of course these bilateral trade agreements that he's talking about, India is already into this kind of the negotiations. But the bottom line that Trump has actually said is it's going to be benefiting me. And that is the big departure, because whenever countries have actually done these bilateral trade negotiations, the USP is that is going to be win-win. There is something for me, there is something for you. But Trump, my way or highway. So he says, you see, just me and nothing else. And like you said, you have to come and pay whatever you have to, whatever I want you to pay. And
so only negotiation is how much tribute.
How much tribute are you going to be paying to me? That's it. And it's true. You know, the framing of his problematic or this framework is, like I said, that the trade deficit should reduce and eventually should be eliminated. Which means what? With countries like India, we have this huge trade surplus. There's very little or no opportunity for us to sell anything more to US. All that we have to do now is to buy from the US, yeah, in order to balance the books. And that's an impossible kind of a situation. So $45 billion of trade deficit, if you need to reduce and eventually balance, that means you have to buy $45 billion worth of goods from the US.
And our basic income that he's very interested in, or basically the goods he's interested in, Harley Davidson. How much can you buy? The American liquor.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing
Yeah.
that we put high duties on.
That's right.
Therefore, we have to buy more.
Yeah.
Even if we reduce duties, even if we buy more, $45 billion of American liquor is hard. So what can they sell would then be open your doors to my Teslas, of course, is one of them. We seem to be willing to do it, even satellites. And also, it might mean that Google, Amazon, etc., should have a free run of your economy.
No, true. But you know, the big ticket here is agriculture, and you know, because that's one sector in which the American agribusiness is still romping around the global economy. Yeah, and with the help of what? Huge subsidies. Yeah. So, we have faced this, sort of attack from the Americans in the past as well in the WTO, when they have consistently told us, and I've been in some of these bilateral negotiations in the WTO, that look, we have no tariffs on agriculture. And why should you have, you should follow us. So our constant refrain used to be that, look, you reduce your subsidies, we will reduce our tariffs. Because we cannot reduce our tariffs and allow you to dump your products in our market and, sort of then completely throw out of business, the hundreds of millions of farmers that they are and the largest workforce.
Just a little, what shall I say, tidbit over here, that in America, if you don't plow your field, you also get a huge subsidy.
Absolutely.
And therefore, you can say, I'll do this much, rest, I get the subsidy.
Absolutely. So that's the kind of a situation. So in this, since Trump has come to power and he has put forth his trade policy, there have been several occasions he or his team have talked about agriculture. First, he said, you impose a tariff of 37%, 39% on agriculture. I put only 5%. Then his Commerce Secretary came here and said, gave a statement that I told Mr. Modi, why won't India buy even a bushel of corn from the US? Very clear. And finally, when he had this executive order on reciprocal tariffs, he says India's rice tariffs are 80%. Now, it's very significant. Huh? Rice tariffs. So, is US interested in selling rice to India? Yeah, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility because US is actually one of the largest exporters of rice. They don't consume too much, but they're producing, so they need markets. So the problem today that we are facing is that this sector, so in India, agriculture, which is a holy cow in all these trade negotiations, we made it very clear, successive governments have made very clear that agriculture is non-negotiable. Yeah, we have to look at our food security, we have to look at our livelihoods and rural development. And therefore, agriculture is off the table. Now, with Trump, it's not possible to take agriculture off the table. Now, how are we going to manage this? And I'm really most concerned that this is the sector which is going to be, where the hammer could come down, and how would the government then respond to it?
If you talk about agriculture, as you said, it's a holy cow for us, but it was also the holy cow for them because they protected their agriculture right from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And that was the question that you were raising.
That's right.
The subsidy.
Yeah.
That they could put, what was it that time called, various baskets.
The boxes.
Boxes. And that box was the holy cow for them. That couldn't be touched. All others, you had to open the trade, you had to reduce subsidies and so on. But that was a precondition for WTO.
Absolutely.
And the world accepted
Absolutely.
that. So that has been the problem. Now with those subsidies, he wants to open our markets. And as you have said, we already have the Indian peasantry fighting for a lot of issues. Now, if this happens, this would make it unviable politically for any government.
No, absolutely.
To accept.
Absolutely. No, and in fact, the extent of unfair competition that our farmers are going to be facing,
If this is accepted.
If this is accepted, it is, very often, we all look at numbers. We like to look at numbers. We look at evidence as to how big is the gulf between, the economic condition of our farmers and, of course, the agribusiness. Agribusiness, of course, the global monopolies are the big anyways. Now, every year when the government of India notifies to the WTO as to how much of subsidies we provide, there is, like you said, there are boxes of subsidies. There's one box for what the WTO says for low income and resource poor farmers. These are poor farmers, very poor farmers. There's no definition of this, but we generally know they're very poor farmers. Now, according to the government of India, of the total holdings that we have, farm holdings that we have, 99.4% of the holdings are tilled by the low income and resource poor farmers. And 99.4. So you're actually talking about an extremely smallholder agriculture by the government's own numbers, versus the big agribusiness. Yeah. So I think that even the best of the capitalists would say that this kind of unfair competition is just can't just be tolerated, but we are facing that kind of a situation because Trump has come down with his hammer and he says that you need to open up our market. Now, since we are on this kind of the precarious situation we are in, one is, as I mentioned, a threat to food security, and we had won it with a lot of pains and got off the yoke from the Americans in the 60s, and we seem to be again going back. The circle seems to be turning again. So one is for the PL 480. Now the US agribusiness wants to invade our market and capture this market. Yeah. So this is a kind of an irony that we have. The second issue, something that we have been discussing for decades, intellectual property. And, again, with even despite the WTO and its the TRIPS agreement, our lawmakers were able to craft out a Patents Act which was able to provide the health security, provide us still with access to affordable medicines. Not many countries have been able to do that. India was able to do that. And you and I were involved in the struggle for such a long time, and we actually were very proud that at least once we were successful in making the lawmakers see what we were actually talking about.
Also a political point at that time.
Exactly.
When the left was important to pass the law.
Absolutely.
And therefore,
exactly,
the Congress needed that support from the left.
Exactly. But we did it nonetheless. So there aren't too many success stories of this kind of a public movement resulting in in a positive development in terms of a very, very progressive legislation. We don't have many examples, but this is it. This is. But from the day we had this, the patent amended act on our statute book, the Americans had been after us. They wanted us to take away all the provisions which still allow the generic manufacturers to do business and do business very well, not just in India, but in other parts of the world as well.
It's become the pharmacy of
the world. And that's another area that the Americans want us to completely change. They want to amend our Patents Act so that, their companies, the proprietary pharmaceutical companies, the big pharma, is able to establish its control completely like they did before the Patents Act of 1970 came. Yeah. And
so can I take a step back and say that essentially a tribute form, I subsidize my agriculture, you can't, and you have to give me, therefore.
That's right.
They accept my price and then give me a surplus. And then in medicine, similarly,
right,
I will sell you much more costly medicines, maybe 50 times, 30 times, 20 times. These numbers are there. Not really get from the top of my head. And you will have to pay me tribute again.
That's right.
And this is, in a nutshell, what the Trump's policy is going to be vis-a-vis negotiations with India. More of this, but the two sharpest issues are really this.
That's right.
Health and food.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. And just want to, sort of end this thing by saying that, like I said, in case of food security, going back to the perilous days of the 60s, when
the wheat.
Yeah, when we used to say that we have a ship-to-mouth existence because we didn't know whether we would have a wheat if the American ships didn't berth in one of our ports. So we came away from there and what we have today. So it's an attempt to push us back to the 60s. In case of health security, again pushing us back to the 60s. And you'll remember there was a US Senate subcommittee,
the
Kefauver Committee, which commented this was in, I think, 1962 or something, that Indian prices of medicines in India are among the highest in the world.
And particularly for antibiotics.
No, it was actually a general, of course.
The observation was that antibiotics as the example.
Yeah, but other as well. So from that situation, it was among the highest in the world. We enacted our Patents Act, got our generic industry in place, and we are now among the lowest cost producers price. We have the pharmaceuticals at the lowest prices in anywhere in the world. So it's a reversal to those grim days of the 60s, where both food insecurity and health insecurity loomed large. So it's a scary kind of a situation. And you have more memories than I have. So of those days.
The only thing is, the Green Revolution was something we did. And that really helped not only us, but a lot of other countries.
Exactly.
And that made, in fact, European agriculture and US agriculture more dependent on subsidies.
That's right.
And in fact, those are the things they protected in WTO.
That's right.
From the beginning.
Exactly.
But in the case of pharmaceuticals, it's the other way around. We actually developed the technology. And now they want us to really pay tribute directly.
Absolutely.
So this is the difference. One is indirect tribute by subsidies you buy our goods. And in this, you have to pay us tribute for what you're selling.
Absolutely.
Therefore, either you sell at a much higher price, or anyway you're going to be out of the market because we'll have the patents.
Right. So paying tribute, all right. You're actually, the whole thing is about how much all the countries will be paying, the tribute will be paying to the Americans, with Trump rather, you can't even say the Americans, to Trump. And at what level he would be satisfied to withdraw all the things that he is doing.
for each of the countries separately,
All of
tribute
that. Absolutely,
separately.
absolutely.
But we still have the larger issue where the battle between China and the US is not going to settle in this way
No.
because China has said no. And we have a very interesting slide which has been put out by Niti Aayog.
Yeah.
This, of course, is the graphic that we see is developed by Ken. They've done a very nice graphic on the Niti Aayog graphic, but the data is same, which that in electronics, which is one of the battlefields with
That's
the US and China, 59% of the manufacturing is done in China today. And if you see what US manufactures, that is only 6%. That means it's not a question of they're behind China, but they are either behind or on par with a number of Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, like, for instance, Malaysia. But Malaysia is smaller. Of course, you can say Taiwan, which is the big one. And I think Korea is also relatively
They're
about the same.
Yeah.
So if you see all this, now how does actually the trade war pan out is a question which Mr. Trump will have to sort out, because it's not vis-a-vis us or vis-a-vis others that the trade war is supposed to be waged. It's really against China.
That's right.
And China is not backing down. That is very clear.
No, it's not backing down. In fact, if you look at China's stance vis-a-vis the US, from 2018, which is when the first round of trade war with the US was initiated by Trump, China has reduced its exposure to the United States by almost 6%. Yeah,
in trade terms.
In trade terms. So exports, about 19%, more than 19%, about 20% of exports of China at that time was going to the US. Today, in the first 3 months of 25, 13.5% was going to the US. So China has very consciously decoupled itself from the United States.
Reduced.
No, well,
linkage.
I would say, I would say decoupled, because there is no kind of, because I'm using this term deliberately, because when the financial crisis, the Great Recession of 2008 was experienced, and China was really romping in the global economy at that time, the Americans told China very categorically, you decouple from the international economy. You start looking at your domestic market. Don't just go and keep on expanding. That is not the way to go. Now, what the Chinese have now done is that they've reduced their exposure to the US. They've gone elsewhere, and this is what the Chinese can do, and they do very well. They've increased their exports to other countries, including ours. It's gone up substantially, ASEAN and other countries. So if this trajectory goes, continues, and US is, US American consumers are hugely dependent on the Chinese. The US is going to end up with a shortage economy. Yeah. So quite apart from this short-term kind of impact of tariffs, they're going to be facing shortages. So this whole kind of price rise, kind of inflation that is now being predicted, is going to be almost permanent. They can't really get out of this. So because China would have committed itself to other markets, so China would in no way look at the US. Now I am quite startled to see this, the kind of risk that Trump is taking, because when China is such a dominant power at this point, and it is not easy for the US to become a manufacturing superpower. It is almost impossible to do that. It doesn't have the wherewithal to do it, and most importantly, it can't be, it can't be competitive. With a high-cost economy, with an overvalued dollar, you can't do that. If you look at per capita income of China and the US, and you see that it's almost 6 times or at least 5 times lower, then you will understand very clearly that the Americans can't produce anything which can sell unless they give huge subsidies like they're giving in case of agriculture.
Or they reduce the value of the dollar to 1/5.
Exactly.
This
So
is the other
exactly
way.
the other way, and which he doesn't want to walk that path, and no one should actually. I don't think
Yeah,
that that's an option for
feasible.
anyone. That's an
Not
option for
feasible.
anyone. But that's the situation. So this kind of a shock that he's imparting to his own economy is unbelievable. No, I think it's no leader in any country would do something of this kind to his economy. What Trump is doing.
Well, there are two ways of looking at it. One, of course, that he doesn't understand economics, which probably is true. The other, he believes his stick is much bigger than it really is. And I think both these are operating in Trump's minds.
Yeah.
Let's not forget what Mr. Vance said, who is now in India, that the whole WTO architecture was that we will climb the technology ladder, vacate spots which other countries would take over. But they could climb faster than the US was not on their cards.
That's right.
But what he leaves out is the whole finance capital bit of it, that there is this financial power of the US and even UK because of the global financial centers that they control, which also means black money flows, the
yeah.
treasure islands, services that are done.
Yeah.
And for instance, when you come to essentially flows of goods or flows of money, then they try to control both. One through insurance, banks, and so on. The other, of course, through black money. Where does it go?
Exactly.
So, and that's something which China might be able to control. They have a much closer grip on their own economy. But countries like India and various other capitalist countries are not able to control this. And also, of course, that the huge American corporations are, I think, headquartered in Ireland and things like this. And that money that comes to them then goes into treasure islands
That's
again.
right. Exactly.
And so all this, of course, is a much larger correction of the world. But what you're raising is, or what you've placed before us, that ultimately manufacture does decide the world.
Absolutely.
Production.
Absolutely.
That when you look at the economy, ultimately the good old paradigm that who produces at what cost
Absolutely.
and what is the level of technology in that production, that will really decide who holds economic power in the world.
Yeah. But
And this is, as Mr. Vance has complained, the problem is that others are catching up with the US much faster.
no, you know what? See, the thing is that ultimately, the two things, of course, what taking off from what you were saying, that ultimately the real economy matters.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't have an economy which is just on the service sector, in the intangibles.
What's called financialization.
Yeah. And you can't actually just have an economy which is wholly dependent on that. Now, let me just give you, another, very briefly, another dilemma, and stemming from what Vaughn said, that if you look at the major sort of, I wouldn't say, just the trade, but even service balances that the US has, both in the current account balances, I would say, the only major area in which the US has a surplus is intellectual property. Yeah. And that's why Vance is saying this. But then, what is now being shown by China and several other countries is they can actually produce technologies far more efficiently than the Americans can. And this whole AI thing is actually exposed the problems that the Americans face. The American companies actually demand billions for developing a particular technology. Other countries can do it with several times lesser. So now the Americans, even if they want to keep their stranglehold over technology, they can't do it with the kind of a model they have, and with this kind of a finance capital which is which is demanding far too much, because there is so much of inefficiencies which is kept into the system, just because the Americans think that they can do whatever. That reversing from that kind of a tendency, you can't ask Elon Musk to just take a few hundred to $100 million and do something. He'll the first thing he'll say, give me billions, and that's how he's going to do it. And so this whole outsourcing of even the space area to Elon Musk at such high cost is going to hurt the Americans very, very badly in the area of technology. The only last holding point for them.
I'm going to leave out the technology discussions for today because by their own admission, their think tanks, they are finding that actually China's development of technology in different sectors is ahead, if not on par with the United States.
Right.
So that, and this
No,
can
it's
be
also
measured
from
in-
this graph, this graph that
This
you
graph.
have. Yeah, this is actually a reflection of where, it's a very, sort of miniaturization of what is happening in the technology, in the area of technology.
So there are still some pressure points we can, the subject for another day.
Yeah.
For instance, how you do the chips, and the fundamental manufacturing of the chips, the role that certain instruments or tools play in this, again comes back.
Rare earth.
That is one.
Yeah.
But we're really talking about ASML.
Yeah.
And it's basically...
No, I'm saying that the whole thing taken together.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you look at production and you take what I would do a Marxist position, then you focus on production and you focus really on fixed capital.
That's right.
And how that develops. And that is the problem.
Absolutely.
That China is catching up in all those areas, which earlier was thought to be a Western prerogative.
That's right.
And with also China giving incentives for people to come back and Americans are persecuting a lot of the Chinese scientists.
Exactly.
This has also been their own self-goal, so to
Absolutely.
say. But again, a discussion for another day. Thank you for being with us
Thank you.
today and going over what seems to be a longer-term crisis than people believe, because it's really restructuring the world in a way and against what is militarily still the most powerful player in the world. And I think that is the issue that if, for instance, you take, I think it was the French queen who had said after me, or was it the French king who had said after me the deluge? Now, are we really getting into that? I think it's Louis XIV.
Louis XIV.
I think that after me the deluge. Are we getting into a after me hell, I don't really care, of Mr. Trump?
Yeah.
So that is the scenario that we are in. It is a make or break moment for the world economy. It's also a make and break moment for the Trump presidency.
That's right.
So I think we have a lot riding on what's happening now, because these are one of the few inflection points you see in history. And clearly, this is one of them.
Absolutely.
And how it pans out will determine at least what will happen for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
True.
Of course, for all of us, the issue is how does India play on this wicket, if we use a cricket analogy.
Exactly.
And that will also determine where it stands vis-a-vis the global economy and the new hierarchy that may emerge from that economy. Who holds power more or less? Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Biswajit, for
much,
being with us.
And thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure having you, and we will continue this discussion because I'm sure Trump and trade is going to be on everybody's, shall we say,
Absolutely.
books at the moment.
Yeah.
And this is something that we are not going to get rid of soon.
No, and the important thing for us is to really find out, or to sort of discover what would be our trump card.
You're using the word
millionaire.
Trump card.
Yeah, Trump
Okay. And the government also believes the same,
Yeah.
except their Trump card is a different one.
That's right. Absolutely.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Biswajit.
Thank you, man.
This is all the time we have in NewsClick today. Do keep following us in various platforms that we are on and keep watching NewsClick.